All right, I want to do a little comparison of decks. So the green deck on the left side of your screen is a 60-inch 7-iron deck for the 2007 and later X series, X7 series. On the right side of your screen, the yellow deck is a 62C deck. Originally, this deck would have come on like a 485, 585, those type tractors, and it would be later comparable to the 62 Edge deck, very comparable structure, or overall deck. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you a little bit of overview and comparison of the two decks, mostly so if you're shopping for decks or you're looking at used tractors, you know what the differences in the decks are. The 62C deck is going to be very comparable to the 54C deck. In fact, many of the parts interchange. The blades are obviously a little bit different, a little bit longer. But like I said, the main purpose of this video is mostly to kind of give you a comparison of the two decks. When you're making a decision on buying a X series tractor, kind of give you an idea of why the 7-irons are a little bit more desirable than, say, the 62C, even though you lose 2 inches of overall width with the 7-iron compared to the 62C. So just to kind of frame up the deal here, the 7-iron, which is limited to dealer stock as far as I know, has a retail cost right now of $2,350 if you can find one. I think a couple online Deere dealers have them, and there may be some in the warehouse, I'm not sure. But it is a discontinued deck since they now offer the 60HC deck for the new 2013 and newer X series units. The 62C, the 62 Edge deck, you can buy for approximately $1,800. So there's, $550 price difference in the decks themselves. So that's something you can factor into buying an X7 series. That's why the 7-irons are oftentimes, those tractors are a little bit more expensive than, say, a X series with a 54 or 62-inch deck. The 7-iron does bring a little bit of value to those deals. To kind of give you a little bit of the specs, one of the biggest things, the 7-iron is a commercial grade deck. The commercial grade deck, it's 7-gauge steel. Overall, the thickness of the deck is 0.1875 inches, 7-gauge steel. Then the 62C is 10-gauge steel, or 0.135 inches. So the 7-iron deck is a thicker deck. It's got some more reinforcing that I'll go over here in just a little bit. Now, in terms of the gear case on the 7-iron is a little bit more heavy duty than the gear case on the 62C, which I'll show you here in just a minute. Along with a couple other factors. There are some factors that are very similar. One of the things you do notice straight off the bat is the fact that the gauge wheels are obviously different, and then the 7-iron has drive over capabilities compared to the 62C. The 7-iron is a much deeper deck. It is a 5.5 inch deep deck. Meanwhile, the 62C, I don't have a specific spec for it, or I have not been able to find one, but the 62C I would say is probably an inch shallower. So the 7-iron is going to do a little bit better job at cutting taller grass, has a little bit more vacuum depending on the blade you put on it. But I'm going to shut the camera off and I'm going to get kind of set up here a little bit. We're going to go over some of the things that you would look at on these decks comparing the two. Alright, so we're looking at the back of the 7-iron deck, and you can actually tell how much deeper the 7-iron is over the 62C. When I come over here to the 62C, you can see that the deck itself is not nearly as deep as the 7-iron. And here, we'll get down here on the level playing field, and you can kind of see the difference in the two decks. Hopefully you can pick that up. I'll try to remember to put a tape measure on it in a different part of the video. Obviously, there's very similar supporting gussets and stuff like that on the decks. Obviously, one of the biggest things is the 7-iron has a welded bar around the bottom. Meanwhile, the 62C is just a stamped steel deck. There's no welds, it's just supported by that stamped ring around the bottom. That did change in later units. There are some changes, and if you look at the current 60HC deck, it's very similar to 7-iron. The deck shell's a little thinner compared to the 7-iron itself. One thing I will note is this is actually an earlier 7-iron, so the front, there's 3 different versions of 7-iron as far as I know, so the front casters are a little bit different than you might see on other decks. Obviously you have the drive-over ramps. You do not have the drive-over ramps on the 62C. I have been asked numerous times, well, can you just drill the drive-over ramps on a 62C? You can certainly try, but I don't know if I would put that much weight on top of these decks without enough reinforcing that you see on the 7-iron, namely that bar welded at the bottom. Also, the undersides of the deck are a little bit different. I have no desire to lift these decks up in the air. I don't have any way to do it at the moment, so you're just gonna, I'll lift up the flaps here in just a minute and you can look at them. But that's kind of the overall gist. A couple of things that are similar is the fact that they both have, the blades have a 1.57 inch overlap between them, so that is not different between the decks. And also the belt routing is pretty similar. The spindles on the 7-iron are a little bit more heavy duty than the spindles on the 62C. And you'll notice that the idler pulleys and stuff like that, in fact, I'm pretty sure this arm right here on the idler pulley is very similar on the 7-iron. Obviously there's some extra couple things, but like I said, the overall belt routing is approximately the same. And I'm not sure that some parts wouldn't interchange, looking at the gearbox mounts and stuff like that. Excuse me, I must be tired. So anyway, one of the biggest things with the 7-irons, if you're going to swap a 7-iron onto your tractors, you'll need to change the lift pins. On the 2006 and newer, or 2006 and older X series, they only have 1 pin on the draft arm mounts, and these are the draft arms which are currently off my X748. And the 2007 and later, they have 2 mounts, 2 pins for the draft arms. You have to put them in the upper one. There was a few structural changes there. Some of those can be found on Deere's website. But anyway, I'll go ahead and lift up the flaps here, and you can look under there and see how everything's put together. Hopefully you can see it. So you can see on the 7-iron how much deeper it is, and kind of how heavy duty it is. Like I said, the overall design of the deck is, in my opinion, a little bit better. Certainly more expensive to build based on just the stamping of the steel and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's the 7-iron. And then we'll go over here and look at the 62C. And you can see the 62C, you don't have this dip and valley right here where my hand is at on the 7-iron. The 7-iron is actually flat all the way across, so it's just solid. It's a solid surface. You have obviously the mounts for the spindles and stuff. Meanwhile, on the 62C, it's very traditional style deck where you have the grass is going to come up over there and then shoot out this tunnel here, and you don't have that necessarily on the 7-iron, hence the reason it's a deeper deck. Now, you'll be able to see under here a little bit better because this deck has never been used, but you can see it's a much shallower deck. There's some reinforcing welded into the side there, stuff like that. You can see the spindles aren't nearly as large. They don't have as much grease capacity, stuff like that. But overall, these are both really good decks. I have used a 54C on my X748 before I got the 7-iron. Perfectly happy with it. In fact, it was a nice deck, and I traded it off for the 7-iron and with a little bit of cash to get the 7-iron instead of mowing with the 54C. So hopefully that kind of shows you a little bit difference between the decks and why the 7-iron is an extra $500 compared to the 62C. and also why a tractor with a 7-iron is probably going to be a little bit more desirable. Obviously, there's the 48-inch deck, which I haven't talked about. It barely covers the tracks of X748, so you know, if you have to go through a gate or something, it might be the deck for you. That really depends. But anyway, hopefully this video is helpful and it's not too long. Listen to me babble about decks. Anyway, but thanks for watching.